Okay, I am over technology right now, and I'm like, you know what? Why am I playing around with this computer when I can just go back to the old school way? So right now I am using my phone. We will see how well this goes. And I am starting this video for the third time. There's obviously something going on with my computer. Perhaps I need to buy a new one. Perhaps I need to update. I have no idea. The vocals on this will not nearly be as good probably as the vocals that you're used to, because this is just good old school live video recording off my telephone. But I am committed to not getting any more behind. So hi, Cliff. Welcome back for the third time, and thank you for dealing with me for 3 times on this in one video that I'm trying to get done. Obviously, I am being fought on every hand, but I don't discourage easily. That's never been a problem of mine, and so I am the person that says where there is a will, there is a way, and so we are going on. And we're going to use the phone, and we're going to catch up. And if I have to catch up other places, I will, to make sure that we get caught up. So I'm just going to encourage everyone to listen to 14 again if you missed it. Basically, it ends with Absalom coming back into David's presence. And David, after not seeing his son for 5 years, after Absalom murdered his brother Amnon, and for raping his sister Tamar, David kind of just lets Absalom back in after 5 years, and he doesn't address the situation at all. He doesn't talk to Absalom. He doesn't, give him any consequences. They don't even, according to the Bible, bring it up at all. But you can tell that Absalom, as we go into chapter 15, feels a certain type of way about this, because he starts undermining David's kingship. And so if you look at chapter 15, verse 1, it says, in the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and with 50 men to run ahead of him. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" He would answer, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there is no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or case could come to me, and I would see that they receive justice." So you can see here, Absalom has an ulterior motive, right? He's planning to take the kingship away from his father, and he starts by planting little seeds of discord. So basically he's saying to all of the men that come in with complaints. So I mean, and this is a really well devised plan if you think about it, because if they're coming to David to complain about something, it means that they already are dissatisfied in some way. And so what Absalom does is he just sort of capitalizes on that dissatisfaction and says, "Oh, well, let me get the men that's already disgruntled even more disgruntled," right? And so basically he's trying to set himself up as the king. And so he does this like for 4 years, right? And after, that's a long time. So think about it. All the complaints, all the people, all the discord. For 4 years, he just standing at the gate every day, like waiting for people to come in and telling them how much of a better king he would be than his father. And then verse 7 says, at the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow." And so basically he's setting up the coup, as we would call it now. And he goes to Hebron, but on the way, he sends messages to tribes to tell them, "Hey, when somebody says, that they hear me coming, as soon as you hear this trumpet, shout that I am king," right? So he's trying to set it up and then throw his father off. And so he does, and he like has a lot of people go with him, and then they blow this trumpet, and it's like Absalom is king, and David is all confused. And because of this, David actually thinks that Absalom is currently about to come and overthrow him and take the kingship. And so David runs. What? The king of Israel, y'all, runs because his son is trying to take over the throne. The king. He's the king. Now remember, this is David. Saul has slain his thousands. David has slain his 10,000s, right? This is David, who's killed so many men, been in so many battles, fought so many different rulers and kings and kingdoms. I mean, this is the man scared of his son, right? And I think that's a testament even to a lot of what we see going on. Even in our world today, we have people who are very well spoken, very, proper people who take care of business and all of that. But when it comes to dealing with their children, their children just running loose, and you can tell that they're afraid of their children, right? And here's David afraid, and so he runs. And so understand, running didn't have to be the choice. He was the king. He could have took care of his son. I mean, in multiple different ways, including death. Not that I'm proposing that David should have killed his son, but I'm saying he's the king. He could have took care of this situation in multiple ways, and he chose instead for the king to abdicate his throne and run away, right? And so here it says in verse 14, then David said to all his officials, we're in chapter 15, verse 14. Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin on us and put the city to the sword. And so I love the answer of his officials, because they basically said, whatever you want to do is what we'll do. And so that's not what had to be done, because his men are even saying, we don't have to do this, right? Whatever you want to do, welcome back, Flo. Whatever you want to do, we don't want to do this. I mean, we don't have to do this, but whatever you want to do, we with you, right? If this is what you choose to do, okay. But this is not what we have to do. But they run, right? And so the king, the Bible says, sets out with his whole household, but he leaves 10 of his concubines. 10 of his concubines are left there, and they're just sort of like, to take care of the house, right? Making sure that when, David gets ready, hey Cliff, when David gets ready to come back, the house is in order. So he leaves 10 concubines. And remember, back in those days, concubines were like a little less than the wife, but a little bit more than just like a chick on the side, right? It's really kind of hard to explain, but in those days, because of all the sin that was going on, these things had been permitted. They were not prescribed by God. They were just allowed to happen because so much sin had gone on. And we can go all the way back to Genesis when this first started happening, right? But we will see women's the downfall of a lot of this. So he left these 10 concubines, and he marched all of his men, and they went, and decided, right, where they would go. So verse 18 says, all his men marched past him, along with all the Kerethites and Pelethites, and all the 600 Gittites who had accompanied him from Gath, marched before the king. So he has this huge number of people ahead of him marching, right? And as they walk by, the whole country is crying. Because, I mean, imagine, it's like, it would be like the equivalent of us. Maybe we shouldn't say with number 45. Let's go back to number 44, because we might all be clapping with number 45. But when number 44 was president, right? Just imagine if there was, somebody threatening his seat, and he decided that he was just going to run and leave the presidency vacant, right? And take the whole cabinet with him, right? And like we all out. So like everybody at the White House, the Senate, everybody just out. What that would look like for the country. Like what we gonna do, right? That was the equivalent of what David did. And so they were traveling at first with the ark and the priest. And hey, Rayshawn, I miss you too, sweetie. They were traveling with the ark and the priest. And then David decides, look, you know what? Take the ark back because, you know, God is going to do what he's going to do. There's no need for me to take the ark and think that I'm going to pray my way out of this, right? David acknowledged that this was his punishment, realizing that the Bible said that the sword would never depart from his house. So he sent the priest and the ark back and said, hey, if it's meant for me to come back, God will tell me, and all things will be well. And he continued up Mount Olive, and he was crying the whole way, just crying. And this is a picture of David. Like, remember, David killed his 10,000s. This is a picture of big, strong David that killed Goliath, right? That fought all these wars, is now crying as he's walking up the mountain, running away from his son. Now, in the meantime, he's still David the strategist. So he sent somebody back. He told, I'll read verse 31. Now, David had been told Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. So David prayed that Ahithophel's counsel would be foolishness, right? But then on top of that, he sent somebody there. So he sent his servant Hushai, who was his confidant, and told him, you go back and you frustrate whatever the plans are. So you just go back and tell them you want to be with them, frustrate whatever the plans are, and then make sure that you keep in contact with me. So I sent the priests back. So use the priest's sons, and they could be runners that come and tell me what's going on back and forth. So David still was a strategist, even in his weakest state. He still was a war strategist, which says a lot, right? We go on to chapter 16, and in chapter 16, we read about this guy named Ziba who like totally disrespects him, right? I mean, he's, you know, calling him out his name. The Bible says, let me find that exact scripture. Shammai is the one who curses David. So Ziba, this is what happened with him. Ziba remember we were talking about Jonathan's son, who we were going to call M, Saul's grandson. His name is Hard, and we're just calling him M. So M has a servant named Ziba. Remember, M was crippled, right? Both of his feet were crippled, injured when they were trying to flee, when Saul and all his sons were getting killed. His maidservant was running out with him. He was like a little boy at the time, and some kind of way both his legs got messed up in the process. So he's handicapped. So here comes his servant to David while he's running away, and the servant is saying, so what's going on is that M has defected. You know, he's left you. He's gone off with your son and all of this. And so David basically says, well, then you take the whole inheritance then, right? Since M has run off with, you know, my son, you take the inheritance. David didn't even have time to think, right? Because remember, he running, he crying, he doing all this. And it's the equivalent of how I tell my kids how they ask me questions when I'm asleep, or they ask me questions when I'm busy, because they know it's going to be like, yeah, okay, that's fine, right? Because they're trying to get that yes answer. This is the equivalent of what Ziba is doing. He's talking to David when David's mind is on like 1,000 other different things. And so he's just trying to get that yes answer. And David, instead of saying, nah, let me get somewhere and think about this, he gives him an immediate, he didn't counsel or ask God or anything, right? He just gives him an immediate response. Yeah, whatever. Just you take the inheritance, right? We're going to see how this plays out as we get toward the end of this chapter. But then we come across this guy named Shimei, and this is the person who curses David. And it says, as King David approached Bahurim, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there. His name was Shimei, and he cursed him. He pelted David. In other words, he was like throwing little stuff at him and cursing him and telling him, get out, you're a murderer, you're a scoundrel. I mean, this is the king he talking to. So it would be the equivalent of us like running up to the president and saying things, right? We'd be arrested on the spot. So David's men wanted to stand up and let's kill this man. We need to stone him right now. We need to take care of this. We need to kill him with the sword, whatever. But David was like, how do we know God didn't ordain for this man to curse me like this, right? So this is part of my punishment. So, I mean, David is in this really low, depressed state where he's just pretty much anything bad that's happened to me is supposed to happen to me, right? It did not have to be the state that David was in. Even though the punishment of God was the sword will never leave your house, it still didn't mean that you had to take all this trash that the enemy was throwing at you, right? We get in that same state sometimes. It's like we're in a horrendous state because we got ourselves in trouble, right? But then we make the state we're in even more horrendous because now we just lay down and die, basically, right? It's like, oh, I'm getting punished. What am I going to do, right? And instead of taking the punishment and saying, okay, Lord, I'm going to take the punishment, but I know that you are God and I'm going to come back from this, right? And so I'm not just going to lay down and die. No, instead, David just kind of laid down and died and said, whatever comes, let it comes, right? And so, at the end of this chapter though, we have this, remember Ahithophel, who was in David's camp, but went to Absalom. He's giving Absalom some advice. And so he says, in verse 15, meanwhile, Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with them. So then Hushai comes. So remember, Hushai is who David sent there. And Absalom believes that Hushai came for the right reason, right? So he basically says, this is what you're going to do with your friend. You just going to leave him like that? And basically, Hushai says, sort of, if you've seen Black Panther, right? Sort of what the warrior, what she said, like, I serve Wakanda, right? So basically, Hushai is saying, whoever the king is, or whoever the rightful king is, that's who I serve. So he's trying to make it seem like he's giving his allegiance to Absalom. And so then it comes a time when Absalom is receiving advice from this Ahithophel person, and he tells him to go and sleep with his father's concubine. And if you remember, this too is part of the punishment of David, because the Lord said what you did with Bathsheba was in secret, but there's someone close to you is going to do the same to you, but it's going to be done publicly. And so Ahithophel tells Absalom to do this. So Absalom takes David's 10 concubines on the rooftop of the palace and sleeps with all 10 of them in the open air where everyone could see that he had disgraced his father by sleeping with his concubine. And so when everybody saw this, can you imagine, like, he's the king's son. The king is on the run, and now the king's son is at the palace, sleeping with his concubine on the rooftop. Like, whatever it is, they're sort of like, we ain't got no choice. I mean, whether we like Absalom or not, it look like he gonna be the next king, right? And so then in chapter 17, Ahithophel gives him some more advice. He says, in verse 1, I would choose 12,000 men and set out tonight in pursuit of David. I would attack him while he is weary and weak. I will strike him with terror, and then all the people with him will flee. I would strike down only the king and bring all the people back to you. The death of the man you seek will mean the return of everybody. All the people will be unharmed. This plan seemed good to Absalom. But then he sends for Hushai, and says, what do you say about this plan? Now, Hushai, remember, is on David's side. So he gives an entirely different plan, says he does not believe in the plan that Ahithophel has given, gives an entirely different plan, and says, basically, he's giving him this entirely different plan so that it will give David time to get his army together. And so Hushai replied to Absalom, the advice Ahithophel, I'm in verse 7, has given is not good this time. You know your father and his men. They are fighters and as fierce as a wild bear robbed of her cubs. Besides, your father is an experienced fighter. He will not spend the night with the troops. Even now he is hidden in a cave or some other place. If he should attack your troops first, whoever hears about it will say, there has been a slaughter among the troops who follow Absalom. Then even the bravest soldier, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a fighter and that those with him are brave. So I advise you, let all Israel from Dan to Beersheba, as numerous as the sand on the seashore, be gathered to you, and you yourself lead them into battle. Then we will attack him wherever he may be found, and we will fall on him as dew settles on the ground. Neither he nor any of his men will be left alive. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we will drag it down to the valley. And then the bottom line is that Absalom took the advice of Hushai over the advice of Ahithophel. Now, understand, Ahithophel was saying just gather 12,000 men, go after David. That would have been a quick process. But now Hushai's advice was, we need to take everybody from all tribes. Well, that's going to take longer because remember, they ain't got cell phones. They can't just call up people and say, meet me here, right? They have to take time to gather this. And so the time that it's taken to gather that entire army from all the tribes is giving Hushai time to send David 2 spies. And that's what he does. He sends 2 spies to David to inform them of what's going down. The spies almost get caught, but a lady hides them overnight. And then they're able to get the message to David. And so David's able to prepare himself. Now, up until this point, Ahithophel's words were taken like it was from God himself. Now, he wasn't a prophet, or it doesn't say that he was a prophet, but his words were looked upon as if he was a seer or a prophet. And so the fact to have someone choose what someone else said over what he said was very damaging to his whole career, so much so that the man killed himself. He went home, put his house in order, and then killed himself because he couldn't bear that. Then we go on, we see David is really getting himself ready to fight. Absalom has appointed Amasa over his army. And remember, Joab was over David's army. So they're getting ready to battle, right? So in chapter 18, the battle is on. They're mustering men. They're coming to each other about to fight. David wants to go out and fight with them, but they don't want David to go out and fight. And so in verse 3 of chapter 18, it says, but the men said, you must not go out. If we are forced to flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It would be better now for you to give us support from the city. So the king answered, I'll do whatever you say. So he did not go out to fight with them. And so the armies are marching out of the city to fight Israel. The battle's starting to take place at Ephraim. And then verse 9 says, now Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in a tree. He was left hanging in midair while the mule he was riding kept on going. So here they're in this heated battle, and Absalom is getting ready to meet up with David's men and take them on in battle. But he runs under a tree that has low branches, and his hair is so long and thick apparently, right? Because you got to have some long, thick hair for you to be held up by this hair by a tree, right? Also makes you know that it's certain types of people with thick hair like this that's able to hang from a tree, right? I'm going to just leave that right there. And so he's hanging from the tree. Now, previous to this, I forgot to mention that David begged the men, please spare Absalom's life. I mean, basically, he said, don't touch a hair on Absalom. So even after Absalom has done all of this to him, I mean, in David's defense, David is saying, that's still my son, right? Don't touch my son, right? But Joab learns that Absalom is hanging from this tree. And Joab is like, I hear what he's saying. But basically, this is the source of all of our issues. And I'm sure Joab is looking at how David has handled family situations up to this point, and he's not convinced that this family situation is going to be handled correctly. And he don't want to just capture Joab. And so verse 14 said, Joab said, I am not going to wait like this for you. So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. And so basically they killed Absalom even after David said, please don't kill my son, right? So when they come back, they give David the news, right? First, it's funny because Ahimaaz is trying to give David this news. And Joab is like, look, this is not the news you want to take to David. And if y'all remember, David killed the person that came and told him that Saul and his sons was dead. You know, he killed the person that killed the leader of Israel, whose name I'm escaping right now, that took over after Saul was killed. He killed that person for killing. I mean, so, you know, you might want to watch the news. I mean, now this is about his own flesh and blood. You shouldn't be running to tell David that his son is dead, right? And so he says in verse 20, you are not the one to take the news today, Joab told him. You may take the news another time, but you must not do so today because the king's son is dead. But this guy begs him. So they send a Cushite to go and tell him. But this guy begs, and he's like, fine, go then. So he runs in front of the Cushite. When he gets to David, he says, all is well. He bowed down before the king. And I'm in verse 28. Praise be to the Lord your God. He has delivered up those who lifted their hands against my Lord the king. But he's smart. Listen to this. Verse 29 says, the king answered, is the young man Absalom safe? And Ahimaaz answered, I saw great confusion, just as Joab was about to send the king's servant and me, your servant, but I don't know what it was. So basically he's saying, I don't know. I mean, it was a lot going on. It was so much going on. And then they just sent me to tell you, I don't even really know, right? But then just then the Cushite arrived. He says in verse 32, may the enemies of my Lord the king and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man when he asked about his son. So David knew then that Absalom was dead. And it says here in verse 33, the king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. As he went, he said, oh, my son, Absalom, my son, Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. So he's crying out for Absalom. And the Bible tells us in chapter 19 that it dampened the victory of the king. It dampened the victory of the warriors, right? The army who was fighting on his behalf to get his kingdom back to him. It dampers them because they like, man, all he care about is his son. And so Joab was told, the king is weeping. This is verse 1 of chapter 19. And mourning for Absalom and for the whole army. The victory that day was turned into mourning because on that day the troops heard it said, the king is grieving for his son. And then Verse 5, Joab goes off on David, basically. He says, then Joab went into the house to the king and said, today you have humiliated all your men who have just saved your life and lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come on you from your youth till now. And so here you have Joab saying to David, listen, you better get it together because you in here crying over this boy that was going to avidly kill you with no problem. And then your men have stood up for you and went to war and battle for you. And you in here crying over this boy that obviously didn't care much about you because he was about to kill you. And you're making it seem like what they did was a bad thing. Now, I noticed in here that never once did Joab say, I was the one that killed your son, right? He never even, and it's not even clear in the whole rest of this chapter if David knew who killed his son, but there is some inclination, and I'll talk to you about why I think that inclination is true. But there is some inclination that he may have felt, or I'll talk about what that inclination is, that he may have felt that it was Joab. But he follows Joab's advice here. He gets up, takes his seat in the gate, and, does what a king is supposed to do when you win a battle, right? And so throughout all of the tribes of Israel, it is shouted, and this is verse 9, the king delivered us from the hand of our enemies. He is the one who rescued us from the hand of the Philistines. But now he has fled the country to escape from Absalom. And Absalom, whom we anointed to rule over us, has died in battle. So why did you say nothing about bringing the king back? So they want the king to come back to the throne in Jerusalem. And so Judah actually is the spearhead of this. And remember, David was king over Judah first. He was king over Judah 7 years before he ever became king over all of Israel. And so in verse 11, King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar the priest. Ask the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his palace? Since what is being said through Israel has reached the king at his quarters. You are my relatives, my own flesh and blood. So why should you be the last to bring back the king? And so David is reaching out to Judah saying, listen, y'all my people. Y'all better make sure I get back to this throne safely. Because remember, Absalom had got the people all riled up. And he had done this over a course of 4 to 5 years. So just because Absalom died doesn't mean that the people were just going to turn their hearts back to David. But he won the hearts of Judah. And they were all one mind. And so they said, we will make sure that you get returned to Jerusalem, because David had crossed over to the Jordan and was on the other side. So he had to cross back over the Jordan and then take that walk all the way back. On the way back, he passed Shimei again, the same guy that was cursing him out. And he had a different tune this time. He's begging David, don't kill me. Don't kill me. Please forgive me. See, he thought David was gone. And I want to make our memory verse, if you would go to chapter 23, verse 23 of chapter 19, it says, so the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. And the king promised him on an oath, Why am I making that a memory verse? Because I want you to remember that even when people they see you going down, right? And so they feel like, hey, you going down. So I can curse you. I can say whatever. I can dog you out. I can just make things bad for you, which is what he was doing because he thought David was going down. But here David now is on his way back up and he's changing his tune. People will definitely be two-faced with you like that, right? But you have to be the bigger person, which David was. David could have had him killed. David could have said, you know what, off with his head, just like that. He's the king, off with his head. But David had mercy on him this day. He said in verse 22, what does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? He's telling them, don't worry about it. You want to put him to death, but this ain't even got nothing to do with you. Should anyone be put to death in Israel today? Don't I know that today I am king over Israel? In other words, David was secure in who he was. Like, you know what? I was really king when he was cussing me out, and I'm still king today. I know who I am, so I ain't got to go and make other people feel little and bring them down. And so remember, there will be people who will curse you on your way down and then try to beg you on your way up. But don't you fall to being little and, use the power that you have to diminish them, because God had mercy on us. We should have mercy on others. And then finally, at the toward the end of this chapter, we see that remember, Jonathan's son, Saul's grandson, whose servant Ziba came to David, and David was like, yeah, whatever. And gave him the whole Saul's kingdom. Kind of find out it was a ruse, right? Saul's grandson went to meet King, and this is what he says. Verse 26, my lord the king, since I your servant am lame, I said I will have my donkey saddled and will ride on it so I can go with the king. But Ziba, my servant, betrayed me, and he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. My lord the king is like an angel of God, so do whatever you wish. All my grandfather's descendants deserve nothing but death from my lord the king, but you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table. So what right do I have to make any more appeals to the king? The king said to him, why say more? I order you and Ziba to divide the land. So listen, he had given all the land to Ziba, but Ziba tricked this man out the land. I feel David should have just said, you know what, off with Ziba's head. But David was feeling very merciful this day. And he said, basically, y'all just divide up the land. So I made a mistake as king, but y'all just divide up the land. And basically, says, you know what, I don't even want any of that. Can I just keep eating at your table like a son? And he returned, to his home safely. And then finally, there's an account at the end about this man named Barzillai, who is an older man, well up in age, in his 80s. And he is making sure that he encounters the king. And the king wants him. The king is so impressed. David is so impressed. He wants him to come with him back across. But he said, no, I can't cross with you. I'm too old, but I'm going to send someone with you. He said, Kimham, I think is how you pronounce his name, is who he sent with them. Most theologians think that Kimham was probably the son of Barzillai, but he crossed over and became sort of on David's team just because of this. Now, at the very end, Israel rises up and is like, Judah, why you ain't tell us you was bringing the king back? Why we ain't had no parts of this, right? We need parts of this. And if you say, see verse 43, it says, then the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, we have 10 shares in the king. In other words, y'all just one tribe, but we got 10 tribes over here, right? So it was Judah and Benjamin more than likely, because they said we have 10 shares. So it was more than likely Judah and Benjamin that were together, although Judah's the only one mentioned. But it's like, we have 10 shares in the king. So we have a greater claim on David than you have. Why then did you treat us with contempt? Weren't we the first to speak of bringing back our king? But the men of Judah pressed their claims even more forcefully than the men of Israel. And you can see that this sort of is the beginning of a divide, right? these 10 tribes over Judah, right? And as we progress through this, now remember, it kind of started as a divide in the beginning because Judah chose David, but the other tribes chose another leader after Saul's death. So this divide sort of has already started to happen. But as we get into Kings, which is the next place we'll go after this, we're going to see that divide becomes thick, okay? It becomes a very thick divide. All right, this is the end of this session. We are now going on to chapter 20, where we're going to talk a little bit more about some people who rebel against David. We're going to talk about some of Saul's descendants who still need to be taken care of. We're going to talk about a battle, all the battles that the Israelites are still having with the Philistines. David's going to write a song, and we're going to talk about that song that he wrote. He's going to have some last words. We're going to hear about his mighty men. He's going to have one last thing to get punished for. And then we'll be at the end of 2 Samuel. So I will finish that up sometime today, hopefully, whether I use my computer or the phone, we will get this done. But I thank you for being patient with me. And until next time, you be blessed. Know that I love you and God loves you too. In Jesus' name, amen.